The brain starter here says that if sine of theta is 8 over 17, what are the values of the other 5 trig ratios? The first thing you need to do is draw a right triangle. Since sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse, you can go from theta and label these two sides. The opposite's here at 8, and the hypotenuse is 17. Next you have to figure out what the other side is. Figure that out now. Using the Pythagorean theorem, you get that 8 squared plus the side you're looking for equals 17 squared. Solving that, you have 64 plus x squared equals 289. Subtract 64 from both sides, and you'll get x squared equals 225, which means that the remaining side is 15. Next, you have to solve for the other 5 trigonometric ratios. Since cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse, that's 15 over 17. Tangent's the opposite over adjacent, so that's 8 over 15. And then cosecant's the reciprocal of sine, so that's 17 over 8. Secant's the reciprocal of cosine, so that's 17 over 15. And cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent, so that's 15 over 8. You can also find trigonometric ratios given an angle on the coordinate plane. And it helps to visualize this right triangle. Because from that right triangle, if you're looking at this right angle, then the radius here is the hypotenuse. And then from this angle theta, this distance here, the height, is the opposite, and the distance right next to it is the adjacent. So, if you plug that back and you look at the coordinates of this point right here, the opposite side is the y value of the coordinate, as you'll see in sine or in tangent, and the adjacent side gives you the x value of the coordinate, like you'll see in the numerator of cosine and the denominator of tangent. Sometimes it helps just to think of sine as the y value over the radius, cosine is the x value over the radius, and tangent is the y value over the x value. Obviously, of course, cosecant, secant, and cotangent are still the reciprocal of sine, cosine, and tangent. Now, unlike in using right triangles for trigonometry, these values can also be negative due to the way the coordinate plane works. In quadrant 1, the x value and the y value are both positive. In quadrant 2, the x value is negative and the y value is positive. In quadrant 3, both are negative. And in quadrant 4, the x value is positive and the y value is negative. Since this r value will always be positive because it's defined as a distance, like this, and the positive square root, then really we should start looking at the x value and the y value. So if the x coordinate is positive, then cosine would be positive as well. If the y value is positive, then sine would be positive. And here with tangent we have y over x. So if y is both positive and x is positive, then tangent's positive. Or if they're both negative, it's positive. But if they have different signs, then tangent will be negative. So in quadrant 1, see that all ratios are going to be positive. In quadrant 2, sine will be positive because the y-coordinate is positive. Cosine will not be positive because the x is negative, and tangent won't be positive because the y over x would be a negative over a negative, giving you a positive. In the third quadrant, cosine and sine are both negative because it's a negative and a negative for the x and the y. However, since the sign is the same, tangent will be positive. And then, in the quadrant 4, the x value is positive, so cosine's positive, but the signs are different, so sine and tangent are both negative, means that cosine is positive. And I thought of an easy way to remember this, and it's entirely based on a word that you're familiar with through the weather report. The word is forecast because if you start in quadrant 4 and then go counterclockwise, the way angles go, then in order the positive trig ratios are cosine, all of them, sine, and tangent. So you start in quadrant 4, and then you go around, and the word is forecast. This question says from 8, -6, what are these 6 trigonometric functions? So again, I'll make this triangle right here. And since it's 8 on the x value, that would mean that this side is 8, and then the y value would be this side, 6. Now, it's up to you to figure out what r is, the hypotenuse. So, pause your video and figure that out. I hope you figured out using the Pythagorean theorem that x equals 10. So now we have everything we need to figure out the 6 trigonometric functions. So pause your video now to fill in the 6 trigonometric functions. And remember, use forecast to figure out which ones are positive and which ones will end up being negative. I'm going over the answer in 3, 2, 1. Using forecast, we know that in quadrant 4, cosine is positive. And just as a reminder, quadrant 1 is everything's positive, quadrant 2 sine is positive, and quadrant 3 tangent is positive. So, since we're in quadrant 4, cosine will be positive, and secant will be negative. So right off the bat, I'm just going to fill in that sine is negative, tangent is negative, cosecant is negative, and cotangent is negative. Now, looking from the angle here, the y value at this point is -6, so we already have the negative. So there's 6, and the radius is 10. Cosine is the x value, 8 over 10. And tangent is the y value over the x value. And then, of course, the other 3 ratios are simply flipped. So -10 over 6, +10 over 8, and -8 over 6.